One movie, one controversy, and suddenly, one of Hollywood's safest stars was fighting to protect the reputation she had spent years building. For years, Blake Lively seemed untouchable, successful, admired, far removed from the scandals that destroy celebrity careers. Then everything changed. What should have been a career-defining success became a growing public controversy. And before long, Hollywood was choosing sides. The media was choosing sides. Millions of people online were choosing sides because behind the headlines were two completely different versions of the same story. And only one of them could be true. The strangest part? Almost nobody expected Blake Lively to be at the center of it. Not fans, not Hollywood, not even the people excited for the movie itself. Yet within months, the conversation had completely changed. People were no longer talking about the film. They were talking about Blake, what she knew, what happened behind the scenes, and whether the public had been told the full story. But before accusations were made, before lawyers became involved, before the internet turned the controversy into a public trial, there were warning signs, small signs, easy to ignore, until they weren't. Because while audiences were waiting for the release of It Ends With Us, something behind the scenes was quietly falling apart, and almost nobody noticed. Every major Hollywood scandal begins the same way. Not with a lawsuit, not with a headline, and not with a public accusation. It begins with something that doesn't feel right. At first, almost nobody noticed. Why would they? It Ends With Us looked like a guaranteed success. The novel had sold millions of copies. Fans had waited years for a film adaptation. And when Blake Lively joined the project, the excitement only grew stronger. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, at least from the outside. Behind the scenes, things may have looked very different. Justin Baldoni had spent years trying to bring the story to the screen. For him, this wasn't just another movie. It was a passion project, one he had fought to make a reality. Then, production began, and according to later reports and public claims, disagreements slowly started to emerge. Not explosive arguments, not dramatic confrontations, at least not publicly, just tension. The kind of tension that often stays hidden from audiences until it doesn't. As filming continued, small details began attracting attention. Details that seemed meaningless on their own, but far more significant when viewed together. Fans noticed Blake and Justin were rarely seen together during promotion. Joint appearances felt limited. Interviews felt unusually separate. The chemistry people expected between the film's leading figures seemed strangely absent. Nobody knew exactly why. But people started asking questions. Questions Hollywood wasn't answering. Questions neither side was addressing publicly. And when information is missing, speculation fills the gap. Rumors started spreading online. Entertainment reporters began noticing the same unusual patterns. Fans compared interviews, compared appearances, compared body language. Everyone seemed to sense that something was wrong. Nobody knew what. Then, another problem emerged. The conversation surrounding the movie slowly began shifting. People were no longer talking about the story, or the performances, or the anticipation. They were talking about the people behind it. That is usually a warning sign, because when audiences become more interested in the production than the movie itself, something is already breaking down. And the closer the release date came, the harder it became to ignore. The distance, the rumors, the unanswered questions. Everything kept building, quietly, relentlessly, until eventually the silence ended. And when it did, the controversy exploded into public view. For weeks, people speculated, fans debated, reporters asked questions, and Hollywood remained silent. Then, the silence ended. The allegations became public, and suddenly, everything changed. What had once been whispers behind the scenes became international headlines. Entertainment websites exploded with coverage. Social media feeds filled with arguments. And millions of people who had never even heard of the dispute suddenly had an opinion about it. The movie disappeared. The controversy took center stage. One side described a troubling experience behind the scenes. The other side strongly rejected that version of events. Both sides insisted they were telling the truth. Both sides claimed the public was missing important facts, and neither side appeared willing to back down. That was the moment the story stopped being about a movie. It became a battle over credibility. Who was telling the truth? Who was protecting their reputation? And who was trying to control the narrative? Nobody seemed to agree. Supporters of Blake immediately rallied behind her. Supporters of Justin defended him just as fiercely. Others argued that the public still didn't know enough to reach any conclusion. The internet quickly split into opposing camps, and every new development pushed them further apart. Then, another problem emerged. The story was growing faster than the facts. Every article created new debates. Every interview created new theories. Every statement created new questions. Instead of bringing clarity, the controversy became more confusing. And confusion creates opportunity. Opportunity for speculation. Opportunity for rumors. Opportunity for people to fill in the missing pieces themselves. Soon, everyone seemed convinced they understood what happened, even though nobody outside the people involved knew the complete story. That uncertainty only made the controversy bigger, because mysteries attract attention, and Hollywood loves attention, especially when famous names are involved. But while the public argued over what had already happened, something even more important was taking place behind the scenes. The response was being prepared, a response that would completely change the direction of the story, because Justin Baldoni had no intention of staying silent. And when he finally responded, the controversy entered an entirely new phase, a phase that transformed a Hollywood dispute into a full-scale public war. Most Hollywood controversies follow a familiar pattern. An accusation appears. The public reacts. A statement is released. And eventually, the story fades away. This story didn't, because Justin Baldoni chose to fight back. And the moment he did, everything changed. Until then, many people believed they already understood what had happened. Now there was another version of the story, another explanation, another side, demanding to be heard. Suddenly, the public wasn't looking at one narrative. They were looking at two, and the gap between them was enormous. Each side claimed important facts were being ignored. Each side argued that the public was being given an incomplete picture. Each side insisted the truth was on their side. The battle was no longer about what happened. It was about who people believed. And in modern Hollywood, belief can be more powerful than facts, because perception shapes headlines, perception shapes careers, and perception shapes public opinion. The conflict quickly moved beyond entertainment news. Lawyers became involved. Statements became more strategic. Every word seemed carefully chosen. Every response appeared calculated, not just for legal reasons, but for public ones, because by now, millions of people were watching. Every development generated new headlines. Every headline generated new reactions. Every reaction generated new arguments. The cycle became impossible to stop, and the more information emerged, the less certain people seemed to become. Supporters on both sides dug in deeper. Neutral observers struggled to keep up, and social media transformed every update into a new battlefield. The movie itself had almost vanished from the conversation. Nobody was discussing scenes. Nobody was discussing performances. Nobody was discussing reviews. The conflict had consumed everything. What was supposed to be a major Hollywood success had become something else entirely, a reputation war. And reputation wars are dangerous, because even if you win, you rarely walk away untouched. The longer the fight continued, the higher the stakes became. For Blake, for Justin, for the film, and for everyone connected to it. Then, something happened that neither side could fully control. The internet stopped watching the war and started participating in it. Millions of strangers became investigators, commentators, detectives, judges, and juries. The controversy no longer belonged to the people involved. It belonged to everyone. And that made the situation far more unpredictable, because once the internet takes control of a story, nobody controls where it goes next. At this point, the controversy was no longer growing. It was spreading, far beyond the people directly involved, far beyond the movie itself, and far beyond Hollywood. What had started as a dispute behind the scenes was now being debated everywhere. TikTok, YouTube, entertainment podcasts, news outlets, online forums. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, and everyone seemed convinced they knew what really happened. The internet didn't just follow the story, it dissected it. Every interview became evidence. Every public appearance became evidence. Every facial expression became evidence. People searched through old videos, old press tours, old social media posts, looking for clues, looking for contradictions, looking for proof that their side was right. And once that process begins, it becomes almost impossible to stop. The controversy was now moving faster than anyone could control. One viral clip could change public opinion overnight. One headline could trigger thousands of reactions within minutes. One interview could restart an argument that seemed finished days earlier. The cycle never ended, and neither side could escape it. For Blake, every appearance suddenly carried new pressure. Every public statement was analyzed. Every silence was analyzed. Even doing nothing became part of the story. For Justin, the same thing was happening. Every response generated another wave of discussion. Every attempt to explain his position created new debates. Neither side was controlling the narrative anymore. The audience was, and audiences are unpredictable. Some people changed their minds repeatedly. Others became more convinced than ever. The controversy no longer had one version. It had thousands. A different version for every corner of the internet. That was when the real damage began to appear. Not legal damage, not financial damage, public damage. The kind that spreads quietly. The kind that follows people long after headlines disappear. The kind that changes how audiences see someone forever. Because reputations are built slowly, but they can be questioned very quickly. And once millions of people start questioning them at the same time, the impact can be enormous. The tragedy was that the movie itself had become almost irrelevant. The project everyone worked on. The story everyone wanted to tell. The reason all of this started. It had been completely overshadowed. The controversy had become bigger than the film, bigger than the marketing campaign, bigger than the release itself. And now, people were no longer asking, what happened. They were asking who would suffer the consequences, because by this point, it was obvious that everyone was paying a price. The only question was how much. For months, people argued about who was right, who was wrong, who started the conflict, who was telling the truth. But by now, a different question had become far more important. Who was paying the price? Because every major public controversy leaves damage behind. And this one was no different. For Blake Lively, the biggest loss wasn't necessarily a role, or a movie, or even a headline. It was certainty. For years, her public image had been remarkably stable. People knew who Blake Lively was, or at least they thought they did. Successful actress, Hollywood favorite, one half of a beloved celebrity couple, a star largely untouched by major controversy. Now, that certainty was gone, not because everyone suddenly disliked her, but because millions of people were asking questions they had never asked before. Questions about her decisions, questions about her actions, questions about what really happened behind the scenes. And once those questions enter the public conversation, they rarely disappear completely. Justin Baldoni faced a different challenge. Before the controversy, many people knew him primarily for his work. Now, for countless observers around the world, his name had become permanently connected to the dispute. Whether fair or unfair, controversy has a way of rewriting public perception. Sometimes permanently, and that reality can follow people for years, long after the original story fades. But perhaps the biggest casualty wasn't Blake or Justin. It was the movie itself, the film that brought everyone together, the project that should have been the focus, the reason all of this existed in the first place. Instead, it became background noise. The story behind the movie became bigger than the movie. The conflict became bigger than the performances. The controversy became bigger than the release. And once that happens, there is no easy way back. What should have been remembered as a major Hollywood adaptation was now being remembered for something entirely different. That may have been the cruelest irony of all. Years of work, millions of dollars, countless hours of production. And yet, the conversation kept returning to the same conflict. Again, and again, and again. Now, everyone involved had lost something. Time, privacy, peace of mind, control of the narrative, and perhaps most importantly, the ability to move on. Because the internet rarely moves on completely. Old headlines remain searchable. Old debates remain accessible. Old controversies never fully disappear. They simply wait, ready to return whenever public attention comes back. And that reality created one final question. After all the accusations, all the headlines, all the legal battles, all the public arguments, was there ever going to be a real winner? Or was everyone destined to leave the battlefield carrying scars? After everything that happened, after the headlines, after the arguments, after the accusations, one question still remains. Who really lost? At first, the answer seems obvious. Some people believe Blake Lively lost. Others believe Justin Baldoni did. But the longer people examine the controversy, the harder that question becomes to answer. Because public wars rarely create clear winners. They create consequences, and consequences rarely affect only one side. For Blake, the controversy transformed the conversation around her career. For years, people talked about her success, her projects, her influence. Now, many conversations begin somewhere else. With the controversy, with the questions, with the uncertainty. That shift alone changes everything. For Justin, the story became equally difficult to escape. No matter how the public viewed the dispute, his name was now permanently connected to it. Every future project, every future interview, every future headline could bring people back to this moment, back to this controversy, back to this conflict. That is the reality of modern fame. The internet remembers, even when the people involved want to move on. But perhaps the greatest loss wasn't personal. Perhaps it was cultural, because stories like this slowly change the way audiences see everything. Fans become investigators. Interviews become evidence. Public appearances become clues. And every disagreement becomes a potential scandal waiting to happen. Trust becomes harder. Doubt becomes easier. Suspicion becomes automatic. The audience no longer watches from the outside. They become part of the story itself. And once that happens, every controversy grows larger than the people at its center. That may be the most fascinating part of this entire saga. A movie intended to tell one story ended up creating another, a much larger one, a story about power, perception, influence, public opinion, and the extraordinary speed at which reputations can change in the digital age. Because in today's world, the battle is not always fought in court. It is not always fought in boardrooms. And it is not always fought behind closed doors. Sometimes, the most important battle takes place in public, across headlines, across social media, across millions of screens around the world. And once that battle begins, nobody controls where it ends. Maybe Blake Lively lost something. Maybe Justin Baldoni did too. Maybe both of them did. But after all the accusations, all the statements, all the speculation, and all the debate, one mystery still remains. Did the public ever learn the full truth? Or did they simply choose the version they wanted to believe? And perhaps, and that question is the reason this story refuses to disappear. Because the biggest Hollywood controversies are not the ones everyone understands. They are the ones everyone believes they understand. What began as a highly anticipated film adaptation became something far bigger. A public controversy, a légal conflict, a battle for credibility, and ultimately, a reminder of how fragile reputation can be when millions of people are watching. The movie may have started the story, but it was never really about the movie. It was about trust. And once trust begins to break, everything else tends to follow.